These are scenes of liberation. Allied prisoners of war becoming free men.
I was getting overcome with relief, if you like. It seemed almost a dream that we were loose.
Free from Nazi captivity after being held behind wire, some for almost 5 years. For the starving prisoners, freedom was almost unbelievable.
I couldn't explain the exhilaration or the joy of being free. It's something that actually numbs you. There was going to be no more guards, no more pushing around.
As the eastern frontiers of Nazi Germany collapsed, over 250,000 Allied prisoners of war were force-marched from their prison camps into the savage landscape of a bitter winter. Many never made it. They struggled for almost 1,000 miles through a brutal climate amid chaos, genocide, and starvation.
It was only willpower that makes you go, and that's all you can say.
Returns to London as the drama of power politics reaches its climax in August. Hitler and Stalin sign their pact. Nazi threats rise to a scream. Peace hangs in the balance.
In early 1939, men around Britain volunteered into the forces, fearing that war in Europe was likely. But many joined just to get a job or escape the tedium of normal working life.
Well, what made me join the army in the first place was the fact my father was in the Royal Military College Band, and the only place you could get employment round here was to be an ex-serviceman to get into the college.
My dad was a carpenter, and I followed in his footsteps. I volunteered when I was 17, but they didn't call me till I was 18.
I come from the Welsh Valleys, a town called Bartering, and I was in a coal mining family. I was 14 on a Friday, and I was down in mines on the Monday. And I thought, I don't know, I'm missing all the action here, staying in a coal mine. My friends was coming home in uniform and all that, and I thought I'd better do something about it.
On the notice board, which was joining the territorials, it was for home defence. And if you joined, you had to do 40 hours a year, and you had to go on camp for a fortnight holiday. Well, it was one of the things we thought, well, we only get a week holiday, so boss will have to give us another week.
I volunteered because I thought I was going to get into a regiment or company that didn't fight. Less chance of getting killed. Nobody told us about getting to be taken prisoner.
In mid-1939, as tension in Europe increased, the government introduced the Military Training Act, drafting single men aged 20 to 22 years into the military.
And one morning in June 1939, I go to work, and there's a chap standing there with a local morning paper. Across the front page, in big letters, is the word conscription. And he said to me, "Bob, that affects me." I says, "What do you mean it affects me?" He says, "You've got to join the army." I said, "Nip off, I'm not joining the army." Oh, he says, "It's law, you've got to."
On September the 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany. The National Service Act was announced, and all men between 18 and 41 were eligible for conscription into the armed forces.
In Parliament, after years of waiting for other nations to disarm, Britain bows to the inevitable. Youth is called to serve. Britain has given the world a mighty civilization. Shall it now pass away through outside domination? Youth call to defend our freedom goes out to the men of Britain and the Empire, and they answer, "We come to serve."
When war broke out, I knew that I was due for an early call-up. And we thought that the war would be trench warfare. And I didn't want that, so I thought to try and get in something other than the infantry.
In my case, I thought that sooner or later I'm going to be called up. I was at that sort of age. I'll choose when I want to go by volunteering now, rather than being called up. And I was lucky to some extent that I did what I wanted to do.
I wanted to join the Air Force, but I couldn't because being a reserved occupation, the only way you could get into the Air Force was to volunteer for aircrew, which I did.
I said I wanted to join the Air Force. I volunteered. I went for the medical. That was fine. Then you had a maths and an English test. And they said, you're accepted. We want you to be an observer because your maths are good. So I said yes and took the King's shilling.
Each man who joined, either voluntarily or conscripted, received basic training. Many found it to be inadequate.
The training was very poor indeed. For argument's sake, I'll tell you, there was a ring of us sitting on the ground on a piece of carpet with a brain gun in the middle. A sergeant took it to pieces, then handed it round to us one at a time and told us to put it back together again. That was our training on the brain gun.
It was pretty hard, and you had to learn to carry this machine gun and a tripod, and you had about 8 people in the squad that carried ammunition, water cans and different things that they had we needed. It was pretty hard going, and you had to, this blooming gun on your back used to cripple you, you know, and the tripod was even heavier.
Had a bit of manoeuvres, map reading, fired some rifle shots.
Our training included going into bomb pits in Worley Woods and throwing hand grenades and making sure you didn't drop it on the floor to everybody's chagrin. Bayonet training, of course. Physical training, PT, which I hated.
After doing some initial flying on Wellingtons on 12 Squadron, I was transferred to 103 Squadron on the Halifax aircraft and did the rest of my flying training there.
To give a 20-year-old a 4-engine bomber and say, fly this, it was like giving a kid a Ferrari, really.
I only fired a rifle once, and that was on Salisbury Plain. 5 rounds of ammunition, and that was it. That was the lot.
20 rounds. That was it. And when we came to it, my target had got more shots than I'd fired. The chap in the next chap to me had been firing into my target.
Hurried and insufficient training would leave many of the recruits ignorant of the realities of actual warfare.
Being at that age, you don't think about getting killed. You're not going to get killed. It only happens to other people. It never happens to you, you know.
I never dreamed that it was going to be anything serious, actually. I knew nothing about Germany or how strong Germany was.
Faced with the imminent threat of attack by powerful German forces in Europe, Britain mobilized for war.
We just had a hard time training and route marching in the mucky slush. And that all came to an end, of course, when you were told one day, 3 days leave, which everybody guessed then was for foreign service, and it was true, we went to France.
We were given all this Middle East gear, you know, the hats and the shorts, and off to Liverpool.
The sergeant major rapped on the table. He said, "Bacon and beans, boys." He said, "That's your breakfast this morning." And we weren't there long before they shipped us off down to the station and got on a train and quite a number of people watching at the station, crying their eyes out.
And the new BEF is on the way. Down from 100 points in Britain, down to the coast and across to France. Steady stream of British troops continues. This is just a daily event at many a French port. Thousands of Tommies, all willing and ready to do all over again the job we thought their fathers had settled once and for all in 1918.
My brother and I used to go up on the deck each night and say goodbye to England. But one morning we got up and somebody had taken England away, and it was just water, and the engine was running and we were on our way, which is quite a sinking feeling.
They were soon to discover that their training had done little to prepare them in confronting the might of the German forces.
We shall never stop fighting until France stands safe again in all her grandeur. We know that day will surely come. These boys will help to bring it nearer, and it may be a lot nearer than many of us think.
From the very start of war in Europe and through the 5 years that followed, the inexperienced and impressionable would be trained to fight on various battlefronts in Western Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean.
We had a Scotsman who was with us who kept calling out, we're all doomed, because there was 13 of us, there were 13 ships in the convoy, and we left at 1300 hours.
In the early months of the war, a Franco-British force was dispatched to disrupt the German occupation of Norway.
We built defences at Lillehammer, held the Germans up for so long, and the Norwegians came and took over our positions while we built some more positions.
But after several weeks of bitter fighting, the Allies were forced to withdraw in the face of harsh opposition from the German invaders. Returning to Britain, they were sent to join troops already standing guard on the borders of France, facing another German invasion threat.
I was dispatched to France with the 51st Island Division, and we were employed along the Belgian frontier until we were sent down to, of all places, the Maginot Line. The Germans seemed to have a superior race at that time because they seemed to have everything that we didn't have.
I knew a fair bit about soldiering, but I don't know about warfare. I mean, we'd had training, but a lot of what they taught you in peacetime didn't work out when you got into action.
We were ignorant. We didn't know really much about what was going on. We knew the Germans were there. We didn't know how many there was.
I was under the impression that the British Army, we, were 600,000 strong. And I thought that was a lot of men. I thought that was going to be very good. It wasn't till later we eventually found out that Germany was about 3 million strong.
Not only were the Allied forces outnumbered, but many divisions were sent into battle, lacking important equipment and ammunitions.
I hadn't been issued with a ground sheet or ammunition or even iron rations, which you got in those days. And the rifle was an old carbide from the Boer War.
After a while, we got notice to be sent up to the front. All I got was a rifle and 5 rounds of ammunition, all of us, private, that's all. And it threatened with no ammunition. They gave me 2 magazines for a brain gun, 500 a minute to start a battle. Useless.
The amount of ammunition we had was 50 rounds a man. We had an anti-tank rifle, which I think we only had about 4 rounds for. We had a Piat gun with a couple of shells.
Piat gun was just a waste of time. You might as well have thrown snowballs at tanks.
This lack of experience and weaponry led to the near annihilation of the British Expeditionary Force. Overwhelmed by the blitzkrieg tactics adopted as the Nazi armoured columns thrust into France, they were slowly but surely pushed back to the coast where they had not long before disembarked.
They didn't have a clue that the Germans were even there until they appeared. Nobody said the Germans were only 5 miles away, or we've got to get ready. Nobody said anything at all about that. The first sign I saw of the Germans were with the tanks coming across the hill, and then the firing.
We was ordered to make a bayonet charge. I wasn't worried about getting shot, but I hated the thought of a big long steel bayonet going through.
It was a terrifying thing, but the alternative seemed to be deaths. So, I mean, your general's telling you what to do and you've got to do it. And even if you'd have said no, what would you have done? We were completely and utterly outnumbered. Nobody expected it to be such a disaster as what it was.
I never worried once. I never thought for a moment that I was going to die. But I was scared that I was going to go home without an arm or a leg. I think I'd rather have been shot, dead.
All the bloody French, they outnumbered us by about 100 to 1, I think. So they were just giving themselves up with no fighter engine, got the full equipment.
And gradually the party broke up into little groups, and we finished up, I think we finished up with about half a dozen of us, you know, and walking back and making little stands every time where we could, you know.
We were told by an officer, it is every man for himself. And we had to find our own way to the coast and find our own way out of the situation.
Sadly said, oh, that you're no use to me. He said, you might as well bugger off. I said, where to? Anywhere, he said, down into Dunkirk. Well, where am I going to go? I said, anywhere, that's up to you where you land up.
When we suddenly realised what was happening, the officer was the first one to leave us. He just ran away and said, this isn't right, we're not trained for this, every man for himself, and he went.
In the confusion, over 50,000 did not escape. These early captives were amongst the first to swell the growing numbers of prisoners of war.
And I was so scared, I turned around on my stomach, I took my steel helmet off, thinking that this would be a quick way. Then the firing stopped for a while. In the end, there was only 5 of us who were able to surrender. We got up and we gave ourselves up.
I went into a house on the front of this village, and when we came out, there were dead and wounded lying everywhere. We were surrounded. There was just the sea and the Germans, and the French had all surrendered, left us high and dry. It was really a shock, which we'd never recovered from for a long time.
Did a retreat right through Belgium to Dunkirk. Got to Dunkirk and go and get myself wounded.
Those lucky enough to stand were evacuated on the beaches of Dunkirk. The unlucky, the seriously wounded and dead, were left behind.
There we stayed till the Germans came and having progress about and turn us over, see if we had any arms concealed underneath us. And that was it.
As the British retreated back to England, they left behind enough equipment to supply 8 divisions. They would need months to resupply. In June 1940, Italy joined forces with Nazi Germany as fighting began in North Africa.
And then the rumour was that we were going to Greenland, of all places. And of course that was wrong. We were going the other way to Algeria.
Then as it became imminent that Italy was going to enter the war, we moved up to the wire between Libya and Egypt.
Despite the experience gained in the earlier campaigns, British troops were still forced to fight in conditions they hadn't trained for.
We went to a place called Taborba, 20 odd miles south of Tunis. And I remember the lorry driver saying, "I'm very sorry for you lads where you're going," called Hellfire Pass. When we got there, we were supposed to relieve the Northamptonshires who'd had a bad time. And all we could see were bodies in the olive woods.
Danger did not only lie with the forces fighting in and around Axis-held territories. The thousands of airmen who took to the skies every night for bombing raids were an increasing target for German fighters and anti-aircraft fire.
You arrive at the squadron, and you're still not aware that you're about to face death. You get briefed, and as you were kitting yourself out, you would say to your best friend, if you don't make it back, can I have your eggs and bacon? It was never going to be you. And off you fly.
I was an instructor. They decided to do the 1,000 bomber raids. And they sent me on the first 3. And I was shot down on the 3rd one. Only 2 crews survived that night. And that was an average. It was 100 people every night. And they talk about a war today. 100 airmen every night.
Across all battlefronts, losses mounted as the war became more ruthless.
I said to the guys, I said, "Stay where you are." I said, "They're not taking prisoners, they're shooting every man they can get." I said, "Stay where you are."
As the fighting intensified, the fate of thousands of Allied troops hung in the balance.
And then this big guy came up and he called out, "Gentlemen, please put your hands up, come out, for you the war is over."
The German tide of conquest stretches across the map. At its margins, at different times and at different locations, fighting men are falling into the hands of the enemy. In North Africa, troops are locked in battle.
Well, we went into Deborba, we had 680 men. And in 5 days, there was only 190 of us left.
We decided to start walking, came across the river, that all green slime on top. We decided, although it's stupid, but we had decided to only go by night. But then we thought, well, no point, we're all clear. And we stripped off and waded across the river, started getting dressed, and all of a sudden the place came alive with Germans, all camouflaged, all round us, and watching us for hours.
We could see this Panzer and motorbike and sidecar and all these other Jerrys and that. So, of course, I had no option but to put the white flag up. We fought our way up
to Benghazi, and the sergeant major said to me, "Go up the road and see what's happening, Ron." Oh, corporal, like, you know. I went up the road, and all of a sudden, there was a tank coming down the road, and a Jerry standing up in the front, and in perfect English, he says, "Come on, boys," he said, "for you, the war's over. Drop your guns." And
he said, "I," said, "the Englander." The Englander, he said, what are you doing?" I could have told him, I'm nearly shitting myself.
By 1943, the Allies had succeeded in North Africa. They soon began a slow offensive into the Italian region, which lasted up until 1945. Recruits fresh out of training were on their way for their first taste of the war, alongside already battle-hardened men.
The day came when the training was finished. We was just loaded in lorries and we were given sandwiches and taken to the ship and picked up a convoy for Malta.
In the Mediterranean, naval units were under constant pressure as each side strove to supply its own forces and intercept the convoys of their enemy.
We travelled to Malta, and on the way there was aircraft about, there were submarines shadowing us. Shells was coming in. I think we had about 12 hits, and I was dazed and crawled. It was all smoke, black smoke. All I could do was crawl towards the light, which I could see in the distance. I crawled to the light and I heard a shipmate screaming out, and I crawled to him. I tried to pull him out, but my strength had gone. I couldn't do anything. And those chaps that wasn't too bad, we hung around the sides on the side ropes. And we hung on there for 9 hours. Well, all together, but when they picked us up, it was 10 hours.
As the Allies landed in Italy, the Italians were quick to surrender. But the German reaction was vigorous and determined.
They shipped us out onto London ships. I landed at Salerno. There was some opposition, but we managed that. And then we gradually fought our way north, mountain after mountain, horrific fighting, and conditions and all that. The battalion had to attack Monte Camino. The commander officer said, there's only a couple of German OPs up there, he said. Saturday night job, 8 hours to get up there. Then we had a terrific battle for 3 days up there. It is horrendous.
We were told that infantry were coming through us during the night and would relieve us, but they never came. And the following morning, about 6 o'clock, we heard tanks, and we thought, hello, they're coming to relieve us. And of course, they came over the hill, and the German cross was on the side of the tanks, and we thought, this is it.
Fighting at Anzio was very bitter. We had an American commander who had already said, I understand, it couldn't be done. Well, if you have a commander who doesn't think it could be done, he's not the commander you need. Hitler already said that they were to lance the Apsus south of Rome, which was us, and they sent everything against us to get rid of us. It was a very traumatic experience, something we'd never even thought of. I mean, I thought about being killed. I thought about being badly wounded, perhaps even crippled for life. But I never thought about being taken prisoner. That happened to other people.
The mounting bomber offensives against German industrial centers did not come without sacrifice. Many air crews were lost over occupied territory.
The German night fighter had come underneath us. And in those days, they were no longer attacking the rear gunner. They were underneath where there were no gun position, just raised their guns and fired. And I was sitting about 3 feet away from our pilot on his right, and he got killed instantly.
Bailing out of a stricken aircraft was no guarantee of survival.
They always warned you when you bailed out, cross your legs, because the trees are high and dangerous. Cover your eyes to protect yourself. So I did this, and nothing happened at all. It all went very, very quiet. And I peeped through my fingers to see where I was, and I was hung up in a tree.
There I am in a strange field, in a strange country, not quite knowing what to do.
My trouble was I was too keen. When it started to get light, I know it's very early in the morning, you should find somewhere to get down for the day, to keep out of sight.
I went to two farmers in Normandy asking for help, and they wouldn't know, which is reasonable. They face the death penalty if they helped escapees. And the third one said, I'll help you, and I said, fine. and he took me to a little village, and there was a street, a road, and he said, the 4th house on the left, they will help you. So I went there and I knocked, and out came a German soldier. And I said in my best German, sorry, wrong address, and walked back, and he said, come, and that was it.
And before very long, I suppose only 10 minutes or less, pretty well the whole of the German army was there.
So 2 guys shouted at me, I said, hi. I said, hi, gute Nacht, grüß Gott, and started to walk on. Next thing I know, there's 2 pistols pointing at me.
My good morning must have been too convincing, because the next thing I heard, halt. I started to run, then as a shot, I stopped immediately, turned round and walked back towards this chap. And he was only a little chap, bless him, and he had this Luger pointed at me, and he had his bicycle behind him. And as I walked to him, he kind of backed up and fell over his bicycle and landed on the ground. All these other chaps started to laugh. They thought it was very funny.
And that was the end of us. A lot of shouting, guns in your stomach, in the hock, and all the rest of that. And that was my start as a POW.
From the start of the fighting in early 1940 and throughout the war, over 300,000 soldiers, seamen and airmen were taken prisoner by the Axis armies. Little did they know, their war was far from over. Capture in battle was often unavoidable. After hours or even days of intense action ending in surrender, they were thankful to be alive. But no matter where and when they were captured, they faced a further torment, a long, hard journey to prisoner of war camps scattered across Eastern Europe.
As we were marching through out of the town, French women came out and were putting out buckets of water for us. And as they did it, the Germans kicked them over, so we couldn't have them.
And as we went through the little village, the civilians were standing on the other side, and as we marched down through them to the station, they started spitting at us, you know. Pooh, pooh.
And then they said, right, oh, you're moving out. Where the hell are we going to now? So they took us down to the railway station, put us in cattle trucks. There were about 70 to a cattle truck. You couldn't sit down.
We had a corporal that was with us, and he was the first one to get on, and he counted us as we got in. And he counted 57 in our truck. Some had more, I think.
We put 40 of us in there, and that was a bit crowded, you know. But knowing the Germans, they decided that another 20 wouldn't hurt. So they put another 20 of us in there, and you were in a position that you couldn't move.
The doors were shut, and bars put in place, and that was it.
Horrible cattle trucks without any covering on the floor, had the rivets sticking up, and that didn't matter where you put yourself, sat down, lied down, these rivets dug in, and it's no good saying, well, sit on a coat or whatever, because it was so cold that you had to stay fully dressed.
We were on that train for the whole of the day, and I remember seeing the German slogan on the side of the trains. Die Raden müssen rollen für den Sieg. The wheels must roll for victory.
I noticed on the side of the wall there was all Jewish, I didn't know what they were like, but Jewish messages and sort of thing. They must have known where they were going. I didn't know at the time what these were for, but these cattle trucks were the same cattle trucks that the Jewish people were pushed into to go along to what was unknown then, these concentration camps.
As the POWs captured across Europe started their cramped journeys to unknown destinations, many would experience a Nazi disregard of the Geneva Convention.
It took roughly 2 weeks because they stopped overnight in different sidings. They let us out for water once a day,
and we were getting a bit hungry. There was no food. Eventually, we were given something, which was, I think it was a loaf of bread between about 5 or 6 men, and a lump of little cube of margarine. And that was it. We were told that was it for 24 hours. We weren't getting any more.
We had a few bits of black bread and bits of meat and that sort of thing given to us. And then you had a bowl of this, well, we called it stodge, which was a sort of a cabbage stew sort of thing.
He gave us half a loaf to last us all the way. And somebody pinched mine.
We were saved by a thunderstorm, a terrific thunderstorm, it rained heavy, and we caught some drips in a tin that dripped through the roof, you know, we got water like that.
This journey went on across country, with the train travelling at very slow speed. One stopped dead for an air raid.
We were mostly on the rail at night time, and then they used to put us on the siding during the daytime and move us again at night time. So because there were so many trains getting bombed and all that sort of thing, that I suppose to keep us safe to a certain extent.
Allied air forces were now striking deep into Europe as they sought to destroy supply routes, truck convoys, and trains. Unwittingly, they sometimes targeted their own servicemen. The POWs could only hope and pray that they would survive the perilous journey.
There was a village up on in France, there was a village up on the hill, and the Red Cross were there, and they insisted that we had POW painted on top of the carriage, the wagons, because the train in front had been strafed. So the Jerry said, well, if you want it, you do it.
For some, transit to the camps was a more leisurely affair.
The train was very crowded, and at one stage a German major opened the door, and these 4 soldiers got up. And he said, they said, you can't sit down, it's reserved for prisoners of war. And he said, what a bloody war this is. You know, terror fleegers out sitting in comfort, and decent German officers are being treated like swine. And I said, I couldn't agree with you more, why don't you join it? So in the end, we compromised. And I had quite a nice time, we enjoyed it.
Most prisoners didn't have the luxury of traveling in the carriages. Those in the overcrowded cattle trucks were treated like animals.
We stayed in these trucks for 3 days and 2 nights. Only stopped twice to answer the call of nature.
I didn't go to the toilet there in the trucks. And chaps was doing the business in Red Cross parcel boxes and throwing them out the little slit in the cattle trucks.
Well, you had to make sure you took a tin with you, you know, something, and so you could urinate in it.
The bloke, whoever was up in the corner or whatever, used to try and get up to the top where there was a hole in the top of the truck sort of thing, and tip it outside.
And any sort of bowel movements, they had to be controlled until you were allowed out.
We had a bucket inside the cattle truck. I don't have to tell you what that was for. And there were 60 men in there, so you can imagine what this bucket was like.
Gradually, as this bucket filled and often overflowed, everybody sort of shuffled down that way, away from it, because nobody wanted to live that end.
Well, it was awful. It was absolutely filled to capacity, and you couldn't move or anything. Of course, the horrible smells that were coming from the thing, it was terrible.
Every morning we were stopped out in the country, and some able-bodied blokes pulled out and dug a hole and emptied the bin and back in, and away we went.
As prisoners were transported, many felt duty-bound to escape.
We hadn't been on a day. We'd done about 3/4 of the day, and the Germans found out that the Australians had dug a hole in the bottom of this cattle truck.
There was a bit of commotion at the back, next truck to us, and apparently there were some Australians in it. And they'd managed to get a chopper or an axe, and they was chopped through the floorboards and escaped, some of them. But the Germans came up and they just riddled the truck with machine gun after that. They just sprayed the truck with machine guns.
One American was shot trying to escape. They put in the sidings at night and he tried it, and we thought, well, this is useless trying to escape here.
The interpreter came round one day and said, anybody here with engineering experience? And we said, why? He said, we want help up in the car factories up in Milan. I said, okay, like so. A couple of hundred put our names up, our hands up, of course. And we put us on a train and we travelled overnight, pulled up in the station in the morning.
And the Italian guards got off and I could hear German voices. And I thought, that's funny. We should be getting off here and going to the plains of Po to work.
And all of a sudden, we heard roast. Someone said, hey, that's German.
And to my horror, what happened? The Jerrys chased the Italian guards off the train. They tore down the camouflage. And I saw on the station the name of the station. It was Brenner. We were at the Brenner Pass, which is at the base of Austria. So instead of getting off the train, the Italians sold us a dummy. They got off, the Jerrys got on, and away we went through Austria.
We stopped one morning, very early, misty, and somebody called out in German to two bowwomen walking along the footplate, a track farther over, but they didn't respond. So somebody called out in French and didn't respond. Somebody called out in something else, and eventually they got an answer, and it was in Polish. And that's when we knew we were in Poland.
And when we eventually stopped, it was a station called Lambsdorff. In Lambsdorff, it was quite near a great big prisoner of war camp called Stalag 8B.
These stalags were the German prisoner of war camps. Over 150 of them stretched out along the Nazi-occupied territories in the east.
We got off the train and we was marching down the road to our camp, and we marched past barbed wire fencing and fellas in pyjamas. And I said to one of the guards, who are they? Juden, he said. I said, Juden. Jews, he said. Like as though we should have known. I mean, we didn't know they were persecuting the Jews. I had no idea.
After days of marching and traveling on trains, the POWs set foot in their new home, Stalag camps along the German and Polish border. In these cramped, crowded living conditions, they were expected to sit out the rest of the war.
And eventually we finished up in Poland, quite late at night. And we got out and we marched past a cemetery into a prison camp.
And of course we'll say, what are we put here for? What's them calling through the wire to the others? What's all this about? Nobody knew.
There must be several hundred of us, quite a large bunch. They'd been collecting them from all over the Italian front, all nationalities, British, Indian, American, all kinds.
Many of them were public school boys. So to them, a prisoner of war camp must have been rather similar. You know, the food was lousy, there were no women, you wrote home once a fortnight, you did as the headmaster did. So it must have been not much change.
Having survived the torment of capture, they were now to sit out the rest of the war behind wire. The prisoners adjusted to camp life as best they could. They waited patiently, confident of eventual liberation by Allied forces that were striking fresh offenses. But they were to face many hardships and ordeals that would challenge their hopes of ever regaining their freedom. The harsh circumstances of captivity. With German military efficiency, the prisoners were swiftly moved to POW camps scattered across Germany. On arrival, they were processed and formally entered into the Wehrmacht records. At the start of the war, Germany had 31 prisoner-of-war camps, a figure dramatically increasing to 248 as the war progressed. Most were along the east side of Germany, on the borders of Poland. 134 housed British and American prisoners. Stalag 8B was one of the largest camps and housed a mixture of armed forces and air crew.
Eventually, we landed at Stalag 8B in Lambsdorff, Oberschleicher in Poland.
It was a camp arranged rather like, imagine a noughts and crosses grid with 9 rectangles. There was a road down the middle. The Polish were on the right-hand side and we were on the left-hand side. And the Poles were marvellous to us. They threw food over and that and helped us all they possibly could.
All these huts were around. While the bottom half of the camp, they were building a bigger accommodation, and it was all built on stilts to avoid tunneling.
We saw, almost like a dream, soldiers marching towards us. We thought, who the heck are these? Anyway, as they came to us, we realized they were British from the camp we were going into. They were shouting, is there anybody from such a regiment, anybody from such a place, not, you know, find you in the camp, you know. And so that had a wonderful effect on us.
We went in sort of the perimeter gate, and then we were documented. Took all your particulars and your photo taken.
There were security officers running around, Germans, and all Americans. They were all German Americans who'd returned home to protect the fatherland, acting as interpreters.
I was very surprised when I saw this document. It included my mother's maiden name. And I thought, what the devil's that got to do with it? And then I spoke only a short time ago to someone who was a Slovakian. And he said, did you realize they might have thought your mother was Jewish?
With rumors circulating about extermination camps, some prisoners began to fear for their own lives.
We went to a place with a high chimney, and we'd heard rumours about the death camps. We went in, but all it was a delousing place, and they stripped us off and deloused our clothes in a steamer, and we had to walk through a sheep dip, disinfected sheep dip.
Had our head shaved and all that sort of thing when we first went into the camp. Disinfected, all our uniform, all our clothes taken from us, disinfected, and so we was all sitting there naked for about an hour, a couple of hours.
Our camp was in Marienburg in East Prussia, and we were given Dutch clogs and pieces of sort of square material, they call them Fußlaven, and old Polish uniforms. Some were even had blood stains on them. So we looked a bit of a mess.
There were older prisoners there, as we called them, from Dunkirk and from Crete and from North Africa and so on. And of course we had nothing other than what we stood up in. We didn't have any fighting iron, knife, fork, spoon, that sort of thing. So they said, right, come with us, you two come with me, and you go with him, and so on. And they took us back to their bunks and said, you know, I've got 2 knives here, you have a knife, and here's a comb for you, and they dug out bits of equipment for us like that.
Having arrived in camp, they now had to settle in what comforts they could find. General conveniences like washing and going to the bathroom were pretty crude. They had to make of it the best they could.
The worst aspect of that life was the latrines, I think. which were across a parade square.
The latrines were sticks driven in the ground and a long pole in between. And if you wanted to go to the toilet, you sat on this long pole, which was bending up and down. And it would be funny to see half a dozen people sitting on this there going to the toilet on this bendy pole.
The latrines were a wooden structure, if you like, a large wooden latrine with 40 holes in it. No privacy of any kind, just 40 holes in the woodwork. You just went there and did what you had to do and you came out.
And it all goes down into this sump, but in July it begins to pong a bit if it's not emptied.
And a Russian prisoner of war with a barrel cart and a hand pump came along every day and pumped out and took it across the moorland and spilt it all over the moorland, but I can't remember any particular vigorous growth from the fertilising.
One day it got so bad there was an explosion, it had blown up the latrine. And I was watching a football match and we all got camouflaged to some extent. And the roofs of the huts near this were covered. And my recollection of this poor bloke staggering, completely naked, out of the wreckage of this thing, covered. And nobody wanted to get near him, bless him.
They wanted somebody to run the shower block. Well, I became shower Führer for number 1 block, and a friend of mine was shower Führer for number 2 block. And your job was to heat up the water every morning, and you'd call in the rooms one by one, 16 people at a time for the showers, to have 3 minutes of hot water once a fortnight.
We had a stove in the room. We didn't get very little fuel, so we used to burn the bedboards. And so we finished up with about 3 bedboards needed sunburn, and they used to collapse all together and go straight the way through and hit the one underneath, you know. It's quite a laugh.
You could never say it was hot. You could, in fact, if you hung your clothes on, put a piece of string all the way around this stove and hung your clothes on it, they would dry after an hour or two, but it didn't give out very much heat, but just enough. Just enough to keep us alive, I think.
The lack of food in most camps was commonplace. For the POWs, hunger occupied their thoughts and was the high topic of conversation, if not the only topic.
We had virtually nothing to eat. The Germans came along once a day with a dustbin full of thin, watery soup, and they ladled out 1 ladleful to each person. So you had to have a tin yourself to receive it. If you didn't have a tin, you didn't get anything to eat.
Usually you had some watery soup at lunchtime, but what we call sparwater. They cook the potatoes and you had the water they were cooked in as a soup.
It was always a loaf between 5 and sauerkraut soup, cabbage soup. But after about a year, we started to get Red Cross parcels came through.
The first thing we did was open them up and make a cup of tea. Of course, it was marvellous. A lovely cup of tea.
Splendid parcels with tins of milk, Clem. We didn't know Clem was milk spelled backwards. Biscuits, hardtack biscuits, jam, meatloaf, tea.
And then you do your Red Cross parcel, like, I think we'd have been dumb, we'd have been dead if we hadn't the Red Cross parcel.
The Red Cross saved our lives. I didn't smoke before the war, and when you're hungry, I started. It did help, but it was a hell of a job to give up afterwards.
When we first went into these little huts, we were given one Red Cross parcel for the hut of 5 people. As time went by, it went up to 2. Of course, by rights, according to the Red Cross, we should get a parcel each per week, which we didn't get, until we moved down to the new block. But that then only lasted for about a couple of months, and then that started to go down, because it was really Bomber Command and the Americans who robbed us by blocking up the railway lines. We couldn't get them. And the Germans would pinch them, give them half a chance anyway.
Between 1941 and 1942, Red Cross parcels began to decline. Over a period of months, even years, starvation wore the prisoners down psychologically and physically. With what little they received, they bartered or fraternized with others for food and supplies.
Then you could do a little bit of bartering, you know, and you'll get an egg, or you might get a little loaf of bread, champion, just the job.
With the cigarettes and things, you could barter with anything, you see, with watches and things like that. And sometimes we'd make a deal with the guard so that you'd arrange with the civvy to do a deal, you'd notify the guard, and he'd come along just time, and we'd split the difference.
We had a visit from some Germans, officers, because they were big-headed enough to come round to see you, really just to show off. And they would come round asking for complaints. And the very first complaint they got was, we could do with more to eat. And one of them looked round at us and he just smiled and he said, grass is good enough for you people. And that's the gospel truth.
From the moment the POWs set foot in the camp, the shock of capture began to wear off, and thoughts turned to settling down. But life was not going to be easy. The Germans would make them work for their keep. As the fighting progressed, and to keep the wheels of Germany's war industry turning, the demand for labor increased. Allied POWs were compelled to work for the German war effort. By February 1944, almost 80,000 prisoners were working for the Reich. The type of work largely depended on the location of the camp. For those prisoners in and around the Polish corridor, this consisted of construction, mining, or industrial type work.
They sent us out to work in parties. My first job was on the railway job, and we was picking up railway lines by hand, which was all frozen, and there was a stick to your hands, and that was very painful.
Somebody said this is a coal mining district, they're coal mines, and that's where we were headed.
I joined the army in Wales to get out of the coal mines and ended up working in the coal mines for the bloody Germans.
Many prisoners were sent to work down coal mines in countries occupied by the Germans. This not only aided the German war effort, but it helped sustain the prison camps. Some of these mines are still in operation today, like this one in Evacuation, Poland.
They marched us to the top of mine, and these cages landed and put 30 in each, 3-decker cages, and shoved us in and down we went. I'd never seen a coal mine in my life. Got on an electric train under there, and away you went to faces.
The Germans cut corners, you know, because they wanted coal, produce coal at all costs. The Polish lives didn't mean nothing to them. They just wanted the coal out from the mines. And they cut corners to speed up the production of the coal. And it made things a bit dangerous, you know.
I suffered with claustrophobic. You know, he was always frightened that something was going to fall in. And we had what they call a Steiger. They was the foreman. They used to go in front of our boys, like as we went to work, prodding the ceiling of the tunnels and he might say stop, and you'd stop and he'd prog, and there'd perhaps be half hundredweight or 100 weight of coal come down.
Well, I was on this 4.5 feet high seam on your knees all day, shoveling onto a belt behind you. Very often there was a huge bang like thunder, all the lights would go out, the air would go back, and you felt as if you got the flu.
You was in darkness and you had to fiddle around and get your flint and light your lamp. It was unnerving.
The Poles were bringing out tins of cigarettes and lighting cigarettes. I thought, God, am I smoking in a coal mine? Because down in Wales it's strictly forbidden, you know.
Despite the horrendous conditions, being on the workforce was a blessing in disguise.
It was a good thing to get on a working party, really, to occupy your mind.
We got heavy workers' rations while we were working in the coal mine, and the heavy workers' rations consisted of a thick slice of bread, which had mould in it because it was very stale.
The great thing about working in the coal mines was each night you had a shower come up, which kept you fairly clean from lice and that sort of thing. It didn't keep you completely free, but it kept you, mostly free.
Well, you never see daylight in winter. It was dark when you went down, it was dark when you come up.
Avoiding the coal mines wasn't easy. If you were fit, you would be put to work. But some found ways to avoid heavy manual labour.
There's some chaps had their arms broken to avoid going down. They used to get somebody with a bedboard to break their arm.
Those prisoners who were unfit to work down the mines didn't avoid work altogether. There were plenty of other tasks found for them above ground. The Germans were determined to extract as much work as possible from the prisoners.
We were in tatters, in rags. And as far as the clothing was concerned, I used to go out and work on the roads with my backside showing. And it used to be very embarrassed when they were mostly Polish girls.
And they called for volunteers. So I thought, well, I'm doing nothing here, sitting around just starving. So I decided to volunteer.
Of the various jobs assigned to the prisoners, outdoor work was generally preferred. Many of the men volunteered for agricultural duties. The work was hard, but they soon discovered their quality of life was far superior to that of the main camp.
My job in the farm was looking after cattle. All we had was 7 cows, 5 horses, and the main thing was crop growing. We grew wheat, rye, barley, whatever, and cut it all down with a scythe. Nothing mechanical whatsoever.
We were better off than the Germans. And in the evening, we used to have a cooked meal in the evening again, which could be anything.
In addition to ordinary work parties, the Germans organised construction and work battalions. These were semi-mobile groups able to move from place to place as and when needed. Some of these groups became a permanent work stalag. The best known of these was at Blechhammer. The factory the prisoners helped to build back in 1942 still stands today.
Well, it was forest cut down, and we had to start with clearing all roots out. And, it's quite a big area. And to clean all roots out and level ground off, and then they started doing all the underground work, pipe laying.
We formed a gang, about 8 of us, and we used to go to the gaffer then, the German, Kegel, his name was Kegel, and we used to make a bargain before we started how much we'd do, and then we'd finish. Otherwise, if you didn't do that, you was there for 12 hours.
First off, we were laying electric cables, digging trenches. It's sand, but we had to dig twice as big because it kept falling back in on you.
The job had to be abandoned because we got down about 4 feet or something and we were digging up skeletons.
Sabotage was one way a prisoner could help in fighting back his captors, and was dependent only on the POW's ability in avoiding detection.
I used to get a couple of cigarettes and get one at lads to talk to him out of sight. And we used to put bloody pickaxe through cable.
So if you could get a Jerry who was guarding you doing work to start talking about football, and he remembered it, he'd be off and you'd be saying, nobody worked. You all stood there until he went berserk, finding that nobody was working and everybody was talking football.
The German officer came and saw one bloke leaning on his shovel, and he grabbed the shovel, knocked him off his shovel and got on the shovel and rammed in and did more work in 10 minutes than we did all day. Lads are shouting, go on, that's the way to do it.
Many would face savage sentences or pay with their lives for these acts of sabotage or disobedience.
One day somebody cast a lever up the top and sent 2 empty trucks down the shaft and blocked it all off. Several Poles got shot then by the Gestapo for doing that.
I worked on synthetic petrol, and we had iron cylinders 60 or 70 feet high called cammers. And every now and then we have to go up the top, change the pipes over, because the petrol used to come through clay filters. This particular day, there was 2 of us there, a fellow by a Scotsman, McGuffer, and myself. And he said to McGuffer, go up and change him over. And McGuffer, not being able to speak much German, tried to explain to him that he couldn't really know fear of heights. He said, if I go up there, I'll fall off. And he kept on, and he definitely wouldn't go up there. He was frightened to death. So the guard came over with an under-officer, and he pulled out his Luger, and he said, go up there, and he didn't go, so he shot him. Killed him there and then. You should have seen me go up there. I went up like a bloody monkey.
Prisoners that were caught breaking camp rules were often thrown into the cooler, a small prison room where they could spend weeks in solitary confinement.
And when the guard opened the door, he kicked the door open, pushed me in, slammed the door behind me, and I fell against, I knew what it was afterwards, just a board, and that was what I was going to sleep on.
I sat in the corner and for 3 months, and I used to draw rude pictures on the wall and then wait for the guards to go at night, and they let me out. Go and have a coffee, go and play cards. Came in one night, found me playing cards. Hey guys, in your cell. Chucked me back in again. I was out the next night.
Enraged by the Allies' high spirits, some camps would wage psychological war on their prisoners in an attempt to shatter morale.
The Commandant reckoned he wiped his behind on the Geneva Convention, and he really allowed the guards to shoot over our heads to frighten us, often while we were walking around the compound, damage their own huts. Fortunately, I don't think anybody was killed that way, but it's frightening when they opened up with their machine gun just to terrorise us.
We had a count every day, and in the British forces you line up in 3s. In the German you line up in 5s.
These German guards were people that were no good for the front. And if you could say they were dumb and senseless, that would have been a quite apt recognition of them. And they couldn't count.
And one day the colonel was there, he was getting right pissed off with all this mucking about that we were giving him. And somebody broke when they let load such a loud fart, you've never heard anything like it. It was a rip snorter. And because of that, we were penalised. We had to stand there for 8 hours for insulting the colonel.
Many of the prisoners out on working parties around Lambsdorff worked alongside slave labour camps. Occasionally, they encountered work companies from the concentration camps. At the time, Auschwitz was unknown to most prisoners.
When we got to Auschwitz, about 20 of us. We couldn't believe what we were seeing, all these men in pyjama suits. Gaunt, clogs, wooden clogs, And because we've got to understand they were mostly Jewish prisoners, some German political and Polish political prisoners. And the rest of the people, the civilians around about, were very curious to look at us, English people.
We weren't allowed to talk to them, they weren't allowed to talk to us, but I have spoken to one or two of them on the quiet.
The life of the Jew in Auschwitz was about 3 weeks. They were in such a state that they couldn't walk about. Up the gas chamber they went. This fella, Joseph, I gave him this and he was overwhelmed because I gave him a bit of sausage. And a couple of days after, look, he gave me that ring. And then a little while after, he disappeared. And I asked where Joseph was one morning, and all he said was, gas chamber, kaput. That's just how he said it. So they knew what was going on. They knew exactly what was going on.
The only thing that we really knew about Auschwitz was the stink and the... All depends what way the wind was blowing. You could smell that. You could, it's horrible.
Shocked at the sight of these fellow humans, there was little they could do for them, without the risk of hastening their death or being shot themselves.
We gave the Jews what we could. I mean, if you had a rest you could spare, perhaps, you think, well, give this poor devil. But if the Germans discovered a Jew with some article of clothing, they'd probably knock him to death.
And our German guard says, don't touch them, don't touch them, or she'll be shot. Because even the SS, they had no compunction of shooting anybody.
We passed one of the Jews' camps. I don't know just where it was, but because one of the Jews had killed a guard with a shovel, they hung 8 of them across the gateway.
With atrocities happening all around them, the prisoners somehow had to keep up their morale while they waited with nothing but uncertain hope of ever being free men. Work seemed the mainstay of activity within most camps, but there were times when boredom set in. The German camp authorities allowed prisoners to take up wholesome pursuits on the simple premise that a man occupied in leisure was a man not attempting to escape or causing any trouble.
I became a bridge fanatic. We used to have bridge parties, I suppose you could call them. They went on sometimes 48 hours non-stop, all the time, and we got quite good at it.
We had a football pitch, and of course there was many footballers in there, professional footballers, who joined the territorials before the war, and were all captured together.
We used to make the best of everything. We had a football team, and we used to put plays on, and we used to, out of the cigarette packets, we used to make playing cards. Someone would draw, and we had a pack of playing cards.
We used to have boxing, well, MO limited to 3 rounds because you were that weak, your legs went to rubber.
To help combat this boredom in captivity, the Red Cross would send not only food, but donated items for the prisoners to entertain themselves.
My colleague and I joined the concert party, for which we got an extra little loaf of bread, And then we used to put on, we used to personate various people. My friend and I used to put in script, about the goings on in the camp, a couple of jokes, a couple of songs, and have a little sing-song sort of thing.
We had a military band, we had an orchestra, and a dance band formed from the orchestra. The camp dance band signature tune was "The World is Waiting for the Sunrise."
Unnoticed, behind all these activities, a number of prisoners were secretly preparing various means of escape. But you had to be scrutinized before you could join the escape party.
was all very carefully decided. It had to be decided by the Tally-Ho Club, the organisation, and because you'd only want the people to get out who'd got the best chance, who could speak the language of the area, or they were French or Polish or whatever, and so it was a very selective process. I mean, so that you didn't let anybody go out who hadn't got a chance.
We had a proper escape party. You could join the escape party, and you had to be interviewed and see that you were fully qualified to do this.
The most famous escape attempt was made in Stalag Luft 3 on the night of the 24th of March 1944. It has since been dubbed the Great Escape. It took a year of planning, digging tunnels, forging IDs, and making civilian clothes.
We got so many talents, really. I mean, you can imagine all reasonably intelligent people and all sorts of various trades and professions. So if you wanted a geologist or a scientist or a mathematician, you'd got one, you got an expert. And so that anything we wanted, there's such a lot of ingenuity went into it to make things.
"76 men escaped before the alarm sounded. Only 3 made it to freedom. 50 of the recaptured escapees were executed by the Gestapo. Even with all the distractions that were going on in the camps, the ordeal of being behind wire day in and day out affected the mental state of many prisoners.
Some of the blokes got a bit overcome by the conditions, and it was noticed that if a chap, after roll call, he'd go straight back to the hut, get back into bed, and stay there until he came out for roll call again in the evening. When that was noticed, the treatment was pull him out of bed, make him walk around the parade ground with everybody else. After a few days, it wore off, and he got back into the normal. But to lie in bed like that meant, well, losing your marbles.
We walked around the compound, talking, chatting, gossiping. The whole morning we'd spend just walking around the compound, doing nothing. You see animals in cages walking up and down. We were doing the same thing, just walking.
But life wasn't totally unbearable. Most camps had someone with knowledge of how to brew intoxicating beverages. With ingredients from their Red Cross parcels and others they had bartered for, they were able, in secret, to produce liquor for special occasions, such as Christmas.
The Cherries used to give us jam, which was made of turnips, and that would brew up quite nicely. Well, I didn't, because I didn't know how to brew, but there's always somebody in a prison camp knew what to do.
We had all saved all the dried fruit out of the Red Cross parcels to brew up, and there were all sorts of brews. The Germans, if they found them, would throw them over. But we managed to hide ours under a big pile of coke in the boiler house.
And it was put into a barrel in the loft of the hut, and it used to rumble like mad. Of course, when there was an inspection, everybody sang, because the thing was like thunder up there.
And put it outside to ferment. In the night time it blew up. The Jerry's were firing their guns everywhere, thinking we'd escaped, something like that.
And of course, when it matured, we brought it down, and you only had one glass, and you were flat on your back.
I didn't know anything about Christmas Day at all. We were out for the count on Christmas Day.
And it sent some of them blind for days. It was awful stuff. And if you give the guards stuff, it's like to be sent to the Russian front next.
Snaps tasted horrible, but it was lethal. You could burn it. But one of the chaps, we had 2 milk churns for the toilet. He was sitting on one and vomiting in the other.
you could see the huts that had had rotten brew because there was a long white line of diarrhea right through the snow, right up to the washhouse from all directions.
While imprisonment continued, the war outside the camps began to enter its final phase. In June 1944, Operation Overlord was being unleashed on the beaches of Normandy. On the Eastern Front, the Russian Red Armies began their bloodthirsty campaign, advancing towards German soil. What lay directly in their path were the POW camps along the Polish border, with over 200,000 inmates. Many prisoners have been in camps for almost 5 years, and Nazi propaganda described how Germany was winning the war.
The Germans, they'd be marching up and down, singing Gegen England, you know, to try and get your morale down, I think. Yeah, and the old Haw, he used to be on the loudspeaker telling us that England had finished and London was flat.
But the prisoners knew differently. With their electrical know-how, they became very inventive and knew the true situation of how the war was progressing.
We got wireless sets in the camp that the blokes had managed to put together by bribing the German guards. Bribing them, it was blackmail really. It got them to give them chocolate or something like that, then threatened to report them for having, you know, taken the chocolate.
These chaps were pretty ingenious. They used to make wirelesses and they used to make everything that they possibly could. That's why the pieces of wire and anything they found was brought back into the camp for them to use.
And the coils were some wire, aluminium wire wrapped round a stick of shaving soap, and the smoothing coils were razor blades that, you know, they put it together.
So we had, I think it was 2 or 3 radio sets in the camp, which you could pick up the BBC News.
A chap had made a wireless, and they used to keep it in the coal house where they used to stoke the boiler. They had it hid up there, and a chap used to be on watch at the door of each hut while the newscaster came round and gave us all the latest news.
But nothing was ever printed or anything like that. It was all word of mouth.
Mind you, they raided the camp, the barrack rooms, very often, quite often, to try to find. They knew we'd got radio sets, but where they were, they didn't know.
These chaps were very ingenious. They used to leave a bit of equipment on a table, and as soon as the Germans found this, they said, we found it, and off they'd go. They'd found something that was valuable, and of course we were allowed back in the hut from there.
The guards on the prison camps were not the cream of the German army. They were ragtag, and it meant that if they were looking for radio sets, they didn't see knives or anything like that. They weren't looking for knives. They'd been told to look for radio sets. So everything else was left alone.
So we would contact with the news all the time.
We knew what was happening better than what the Germans knew. We could have told them the news 3 days before they told us.
We knew about D-Day before the Germans did.
London calling in the home, overseas and European services. Supreme headquarters of Germany's Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
The news of the landings in Normandy in the summer of 1944 reached the camps. This welcome, long-awaited news set the prisoners into a rush of excitement.
A night shift came home in a marching fashion, orderly, in through the gate, counted, and as soon as they got into the space between the barrack rooms, they started yelling and screaming and chucking their hats in the air, and of course that woke up the sleeping shift, and everybody got out saying, what the going on?
It was D-Day, but on the German newspaper was a huge V in red, front page. The V1 has been launched against England. And of course We saw that and thought, good Christ, now they're bombing London and all the big towns in England.
One of the guards in the camp was a First World War chap. And when we heard through the radio that D-Day had happened, he was more happy than what we was. He said, oh, lovely. He said, won't be long before you're over now, he said. You'll be home soon.
The excitement over the news of the Allied advance was short-lived. Their hopes of liberation were shattered as the weeks passed and the Allied progress slowed. Life in the camps continued as normal, with the thought of another hard winter behind wire in front of them. Along the Eastern Front, the Russians advanced in fearless fashion. This sent the Germans into a blind panic, fear of being taken prisoner or being shot for their brutality during the Russian campaign.
And every morning, the man of confidence came around every hut and shut the doors, and everybody was on watch while he read us out the latest news, so we were up to date with what was happening.
He said, the Russians are coming very near, he said.
That was the big thing. That was really frightening the Germans.
Working parties on remote farmlands continued to carry out their duties, unaware of the advancing Russians.
Never had a clue what was happening at all with the war. I never heard anything. Everybody was scared to talk. We didn't even know until the Russians were, 100 miles away, that they were so near.
The two Polish men, who looked after the horses, and they had always said that when the Russians got near enough, they were going to do a bunk, and they did.
In the camps along the Eastern Front, things began to change.
We had a good idea because we could hear artillery fire and lighting, etc., and water was practically non-existent in the camp. As hardly any of it was, petering out. So we knew that something was going desperately wrong so far as the Germans were concerned.
But we had noticed that all the factory had stopped producing anything, as everybody, all the civilian workers had disappeared, and the Jews apparently had overnight been shipped up to, I think they went to Bartering.
And they stopped us going to the coal mines. We said there's something up here, so we started hearing the guns, the Russian guns going. I thought, oh, they're going to leave us here now. They're going to shoot off and leave us in the camp.
As the Russian armies approached, anxiety amongst the prisoners intensified.
We demanded from the German commandant, we should go too, we was bombing. And he said, you will not go until I get the order from Berlin to move you.
We could hear the Russians fighting up the road at Captivity, and we thought, oh, good, here we're going to get released. And in the first week in January, the Jerrys walked in the camp and told us to pick up what gear you could carry. We are marching you out.
9:30, 10 o'clock, the loudspeakers suddenly announced, compounds 1, 2, 3, and 4 will be ready to march in 1 hour.
And we thought, what a time to take us and move us to another place. We thought we were going to somewhere else to work. We had no idea.
And so started the grimmest chapter in the prisoners' lives. Their thoughts of being liberated by the Russians were short-lived. All the harsh experiences so far were not even a taste of the suffering and the horrors that were to come.
The situation across Europe at the end of 1944, the winter of 1945, is one of real chaos, reigning both on the Eastern Front and on the Western Front. Hitler launches his last gamble in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, or the Battle of the Ardennes, which ultimately fails, and in a sense, therefore, the future of the German forces on the West is signed and sealed with the failure of that. On the Eastern Front, the Germans are relentlessly being pushed by the Red Army backwards towards the German homeland itself. In the northern part of Germany, along the coast of East Prussia, there are German civilians flooding onto the roads. This situation of chaos really is unfolding, and we are in the last sort of death throes of Hitler's Third Reich.
Russian guns would be about 30 or 40 mile away, and it was just like a continuous drum fire.
So we knew that something was going desperately wrong so far as the Germans were concerned. And they were obviously in a big hurry to get rid of us, or to get us out of the way.
So we thought, oh, that's sharp, it won't be long now. We'll get ourselves liberated by the Russians.
The last reading we had on the radio about them, they were 25 kilometers away and slowly making progress.
The Germans particularly were terrified of the Russians. The Russian army had a long score sheet to settle with the German army. Many of the soldiers actually in the advance guards of the shock armies heading towards the German homeland had fought at Stalingrad. They had a long memory of the war. Their activities and their behaviour was horrific. Death was something that was very much part of the Russian way of waging war, not only on the service but on the civilians as well. So they were terrified.
The Russian frontline forces, they had a women's outfit, and the Germans had captured 15 or 20 women. They'd staked them out on the ground, tore all their clothes off, raped them all, left them staked, and then put a bullet through all their heads. And she said, when they do that, anything we can do against the Germans is done.
By July 1944, Hitler was aware of his deteriorating position, but he still hoped to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat and issued orders for the defense of the Reich. One of these orders was the decision to evacuate the prisoner of war camps along the Eastern Front. In the bitter winter that followed, hundreds of thousands of men were turned out of the camps and forcibly marched westwards towards an uncertain fate. Hitler's dream was about to become a nightmare.
Well, the conditions in the winter of 1944 into 1945 were some of the most severe and horrendous that Europe, and particularly Eastern Europe, had faced in a generation. Thick snow on the ground. Temperatures plunging to -25 were common at that time of the year. We're really getting to a point now where things are at their lowest ebb. Things can't get much worse.
Boxing Day, we heard the Russian guns in the distance. You could hear them banging away. And so of course, that same day they said, well, we're moving out tomorrow.
9:30, 10 o'clock, the loudspeakers suddenly announced, compounds 1, 2, 3 and 4 will be ready to march in 1 hour. One blanket only to be taken.
Everybody got excited. Big cheer went up, and we're getting out from behind this barbed wire. Anyway, I regretted getting out of the camp after. I didn't know what they was in for.
And we thought, what a time to take us and move us to another place. We thought we were going to somewhere else to work. We had no idea.
And we're told to bundle up all our stuff, to put anything warm on, 2 pairs of anything, trousers, coats, gloves, anything.
Of course, panic. You got what are you going to take? What can you carry?
Have you got snugs? Get them on.
Every year, over 100 RAF cadets and some civilians honour one of the routes the prisoners marched. Stalag Luft 3 was one of the camps where they housed RAF prisoners. The camp is well known, as this is where the Great Escape took place.
You are stood right at the exit now to Tunnel Harry from the Great Escape. This is exactly where it is, this exit area here.
Well, the origins of the anniversary march, myself and Air Commodore Charles Clark, who's president of the ex-Prisoner of War Association, were in conversation about the march. And I suggested to him that perhaps it would be a nice idea, a nice way to commemorate the march, if we could organise a reunion march, if you like, and therefore we could take current serving RAF personnel out to Poland and Germany and reenact the march.
Unlike the young prisoners of war, these cadets will have proper clothing, food and equipment for their 60-mile march.
Key points though tomorrow and the next few days, if you get any hot spots, report them quickly to myself or any of the medics.
Even though they are properly organised, the cadets don't know what to expect or how the experience will challenge them.
It's certainly going to be a new thing for me. Hopefully I should deal with it quite well. I've got some really good walking boots, which is something I haven't had before, so that will definitely improve my feet condition.
It's going to be quite challenging, I think, sleeping in the barns especially.
I feel quite pathetic really in front of the veterans and that, because what they've done with their lives and I haven't really done anything. I'm at the age where, well, nearly at the age where they joined up and they went and fought for the country, and I'm just at school.
Long marchers, you are about to retrace the historic route of the Long March. Good luck to you all, and may you march with the spirit of the original Long Marchers and with the pride of the Royal Air Force alongside you all.
For 3 days, the cadets will be marching over 60 miles along the same route that the POWs walked back in 1945.
For us, the ethos, the history has been instilled into the troops. Then they go through some of the small part of some of the pain that they went through themselves. Route marching 22 miles a day sounds, you know, quite simple. It's not, especially on cobbled roads, minus 28 and 3 foot of snow. It is not simple, and it is a painful experience. People learn from those experiences. They learn how far they can push themselves, and they really makes the history come alive.
About 10 o'clock at night, we were taken out from the hut along down to the camp gates and were on our way.
They dished out all the Red Cross parcels that were left in the store, which didn't amount to a great deal.
What you wanted, you had to take, and of course you weren't strong enough to take a lot.
And some people decided to make sledges. And the only raw material you had for sledges were the beds.
I bent a bit over and tried to make a sledge. Well, it worked for a bit, but by the time we got started, it only went about 2 or 3 miles, and of course the thing collapsed.
In my case, I had a spare pair of boots, brand new boots, which had been sent from home, so I strung them around my neck and marched along with these boots. And I'm very glad that I did, knowing that before long I would need them.
And all I had were boxing boots with open toes. My feet were a mess by the time we got home.
I was, at that time, the interpreter to the senior British officer. And we asked the Germans, where are you taking us? And he said, I honestly don't know.
And we were told that was it. We were going to another camp, they told us.
We didn't know where we were going, and we questioned them, and they didn't know where they were going. They just knew we were marching, and we were marching west. As Germany began to fall at the start of 1945, the POW camps along the Eastern Front, containing some 200,000 men, were evacuated and ordered to march west, away from the advancing Russian army.
There were scores of long marches because as the camps were evacuating from different localities, mostly in eastern part of what was then Germany, now Poland, they headed out the northern route, you had the centre sort of route, and then the southern route. So you had scores of these camps that were emptying the POWs out onto the road and really feeding more or less in the same direction westwards.
It must have been about 9 o'clock before we eventually got away from the camp. And the sight of all these men, 10,000 men, and half of them pulling little sleighs in the snow.
But in the column there'll be about 800 to 1,000 in the column. And there's many of these columns passing through Poland and Germany in those days.
The snow was packed down solid and sort of icy covered. It was like walking on an ice rink.
People were dropping out by the wayside already with broken arms and fingers and things like that.
It was so bloody cold, freezing, and when your breath used to hit the lapel of your overcoat, which we had then, it used to freeze.
And we didn't know which way to go. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know which way the war was going.
And we thought we were going to the station because we were going to move to another camp. We were going to the station to get on the train. Just shows you how fool you can be, because we marched, and we marched.
All you could do is put your head forward and trudge behind. People talk about long march. It was not marching, it was trudging. And you just watch the man in front of you.
We were marching day after day after day, and you were herded along. Nobody was talking. I don't suppose I said half a dozen words a day, you know, for days.
Well, the story of how the Long March happened and the reasons for them being marched out of the camp really stretch back to 1944, when Adolf Hitler issued an order that in the event of the Russians, or indeed the Americans and British, advancing towards the camps, that these camps would be evacuated. Now, historians have always argued over the years since then as to exactly why that was the case.
The Germans were still officially believing that they were winning the war, and Hitler made a decision, evacuate them, and that was it. Maybe to use us as hostages, maybe to shoot us.
I believe that we were going to be held as hostages. Now, Didier talked that we were going to be done away with at one time, but I don't know how true that is.
The German High Command thought it was sheer lunacy to move these prisoners. The Germans certainly wanted to prevent them falling into the arms of the Russians, because they could be useful in some sort of military fashion. It's most likely that Hitler envisaged that he could use them as a bargaining chip.
That winter, the winter of early 1945, was one of the coldest on record. And there were several occasions when we slept outside.
Suddenly we were sort of hushed, all sent off into this open field. There was no shelter at all. So we sort of huddled together.
We settled down in all sorts of places, like riding schools we were herded into, barns, anywhere that they could put us for the night.
36 below zero, guards told us some days. And we stop at the farm like, and if I went through and if I could get in a cow shed, I used to sleep beside it, cows and in between pigs, to try and get my clothes dried out.
We eventually were pushed into a sort of barn building for the night, and we were then getting pretty hungry.
When we stopped that night, in my case it was in a barn, the weight of these Red Cross parcels was very soon reduced. We were gluttons, we just hadn't had anything to eat reasonably for a long time, and so we made pigs of ourselves by eating the food that we had.
If you were lucky, there used to be a basement in the farm, and below in the basement there used to be these little pig potatoes, small potatoes, or there could be a carrot, or there could be a beetroot. So, taking a big risk of being caught by the Germans, like down below, we used to go down there and nibble a raw potato, or a raw beetroot, or a raw carrot.
And it makes you wonder how a body could stand up to it.
You just got where you could scrounge out of the fields, a turnip or anything, you know. As long as they didn't see you doing it, they saw you doing it, you were dead.
We were eating what we could glean. We were eating grass. We were eating leaves.
Sometimes we had a bit of bread and sometimes you didn't, and very seldom you had anything to eat. So we started eating what the animals had. We used to scrounge in the mud and get what the pigs left behind, and you'd be surprised what you'd eat when you're starving. When you're starving, I hope to God you never suffered it, because starvation, it definitely pulls you down. Really does pull you down.
After their first day's 20-mile march, the cadets arrive in the Polish town of Lipna, where they bed down for the night, in the same pig barn that had housed the POWs in 1945. But conditions for the cadets are very different. At the end of the day, the cadets line up for a warm, filling meal. For the POWs, getting anything to eat could be a risky business.
There was this big barn, so we all got in the barn there, and there were a whole load of chickens and things there. And I knocked a board out the side of the barn, and I got to the bloody chickens, you see. and I'd never killed a chicken in my life, but I certainly learned how to do it quick. And they were making a hell of a row. I thought, if the Germans come out, they'll shoot me. We got them gutted and plucked and gutted and eaten before they even knew they'd gone.
I remember one night getting into a barn place, and the only place I could find to lie down was on a pile of building sand, which was icy cold. Anyway, nothing I could do, but there was no other room anywhere. So I lay down there, didn't go to sleep, and I found next morning how stupid I'd been because I'd taken my boots off. My boots were frozen solid.
It's bitterly cold, temperatures below zero. So when you got in a barn at night time, your wet boots used to freeze solid on your feet. And to walk the following morning was absolute agony until they thawed out again.
But they were like iron and remained so for about an hour or so afterwards. And anyway, I'd learned a lesson. I didn't take my boots off again.
Now, several weeks into the march, the journey begins to take its toll on the prisoners' already weak and malnourished bodies.
When you stopped at night, to begin with, they put us in barns, which were good old-fashioned barns, which were quite snug, really. But when you started off next morning, little heaps never moved. That died during the night. When we got up in the morning, some didn't get out. And I suppose it was more or less everyone for himself, although I did see men helping others.
And I think that we knew the outcome would be all right eventually. We knew that the Germans were on the tail end of their resistance, and that we were marching west. We were marching away from the advancing Russians. We were marching towards our own people. And so we had a great deal of optimism.
Everybody helped each other. I don't know of any isolated case in the crowd I was with where anybody was refused help, whatever help they could give them. There's always one bloody-minded man who will say, oh, let him get on with it, but the majority helped each other. It was survival, and you had to survive.
Before the cadets continue on their journey, a memorial is unveiled in the town of Chevreuse, an important milestone on the original march. Air Commodore Charles Clark, president of the Ex-Prisoner of War Association, lays a wreath in remembrance of his comrades.
Pray. Fall! Out!
in the last few months, really the whole continent of Europe is on the move. It's difficult for us to imagine now, envisaging a picture where every major roadway, every minor road was full of men, women and children with carts and their possessions. You had German soldiers who were evacuating westwards, also didn't have any food with them. You had the waste of war lying everywhere around you. It really was a completely desolate picture, almost a nuclear vision, if you like. So really they were marching through the worst excesses of the end of the war. There are a number of stories of German civilians along the route actually assisting the Allied POWs on their passage by giving them bits of food, hot water, for example, or even ersatz coffee, a sort of makeshift acorn coffee. You do hear stories also of Germans attacking them as well. Bear in mind something, certainly for the RAF prisoners of war, they were what were known as Terrorflieger. They were terror flyers. These were the young men who'd been bombing German cities and exacting a terrible toll on German civilians.
Along the road, we passed a church, and we were watching the sky, and we saw all these flashes in the sky. The Germans were so frightened, they took us into the crypt of this church, and we stayed there till the following morning when they shipped us out again on the march. But that was, as far as we know, the bombing test.
It's 6 weeks since the POWs left the camps on the Eastern Front. They walked some 300 miles across the German and Czech landscape. Their ordeal continued as they began to show signs of the suffering they endured.
And we were absolutely smothered in lice. I mean, I don't mean a few dozen lice. I mean hundreds. They were all over you.
I had a brother-in-law in the fire brigade, and he sent me one of their pullovers. The bottom of them, there was a hem about that deep, and that, believe me, was full of fleas and lice. It was. And a roll neck and that was fleas and lice. We were forever lasting doing this, wherever we went, scratching.
You wonder how a lice gets on a person because they get dirty and ill-fed and all that kind of stuff. And you try to keep yourself as clean as possible as regards keeping the lice off you. Because it always attacked you when you was warm, when you was trying to sleep underneath your armpits and places like that.
Make sure you get some sugar in you, get something to drink, and the cold water's there if you need to fill up your water bottles as well.
As the Allied armies advanced, road and railway routes were hit hard, hindering food supplies.
The Germans had a real headache. They tried to stop at various different places, and they tried to find a soup kitchen. They tried to find from local civilians a bread source, somewhere they could get hot water or some sort of soup that they could feed them, because they knew that if the Allied POWs collapsed on the road through malnutrition and exhaustion, they were therefore a greater liability to them. But really, as the march went on, they were in exactly the same position as the Allied POWs. No food and nowhere to get it.
You couldn't complain about having no food when the Germans themselves had no food. And if there was a crust of bread, it was going to go to the Germans rather than to you.
Hunger is one of the worst pains you can experience. It's terrible. But after 2 or 3 weeks, you get used to it. And we used to say, we're living on stomach's linings now. I've walked for miles with rice pudding swimming in front of me. Rice pudding. Bread and dripping.
We were reduced to the level of animal scavenging for food. We were.
One morning, someone said there's some soup. So we all found something to put a bit of drop of soup in, and the soup was all right. But when we came away, the German farmer was screeching there for flute de mal and all this business. I think he lost a dog.
The prisoners had been walking west for almost 2 months. As their ordeal continued with no end in sight, the morale of the men sank even lower.
People were dying. In the morning, you'd see someone, one of his pals. He got dysentery. By the evening, he was dead. It drained, it took all of your bowel function out, left nothing.
Some guards would let you stop and then make you run, and then you'd have to run to catch up, and but some wouldn't even let you stop. Well, I mean, if you've got dysentery and you're not allowed to stop, there's only one thing you can do, So you can realise what a state we were in. We were absolutely filthy. We must have stunk to high heaven.
We all stuck together and we thought, well, we've got to make it. We've got to keep on going. And of course, everybody used to usher chaps if they dropped, if they stopped. Come on, we used to carry them.
Some of them were extremely ill. Some of them were incapable of keeping up and just sat down at the wayside. And the German guards, of course, were not able to do much about that. They couldn't force them to march on. These poor chaps couldn't march on.
It was only willpower that makes you go, and that's all you can say.
Only if they were really seriously ill did they call on the guards, and the guards were nearly as knackered as we were, because they weren't chickens, they were all oldies, and put him on the wagon at the back. But you see, on the wagon, there's no heat, there's no blankets or anything, it's cold, and you're far better moving than lying still.
You knew if that happened, you'd be dead within half an hour, you'd be gone. And many times I felt like it, but then I thought, oh, willpower, no, I'm going to get home.
There was loads of fellas that they got severe frostbite, ears and noses and all sorts. And then in the end they used to say, I can't go any farther, and they just drop on the floor. And I've seen the German soldier just kick him in the snow and inside. Whether he died or not, I don't know. I should imagine he did.
The Russians couldn't keep up with us. So then they put them up the front, and we were at the back. Well, that's when we saw all these poor devils, they just fell out. Some they put bullets in, others they just left to die. There's usually about 9 or 10 every day, I should think.
There were some that were never seen again, who dropped out and they were never seen again. Now, I think some of them got a bullet.
They actually shot the blokes that couldn't make it. Some of them were taken away into the woods or wherever, and they were shot because they couldn't make it.
No one knows how many prisoners of war were executed along the march. Fortunately, this horrendous brutality did not occur on every convoy.
I see people pushed into line. If they staggered out, the German guard would push them back into line. But there was no brutality. I didn't see any brutality. And I think the reason for that is that our guards were old people. They weren't young people at all. They weren't indoctrinated by the Nazis.
Well, my first meeting with real brutality was we were in Posen, and a young Polish girl smiled at us, and the German walked across and he knocked her to the ground with the butt of his rifle, and we all stopped. And the Germans shouted and pointed the rifles at us, but we were so... it really shook us to see this happen. And we couldn't do anything about it, of course.
We arrived finally at Spremberg, which was a railway junction. We didn't know where we were going, how we were going. We were in for a few days and worrying all the time that perhaps we would be shot up by our own aircraft because they were attacking the trains.
Many of the ordeals that the prisoners suffered were quite horrendous, perhaps the most well-known of which is when they were fired upon by their own side. There were strafing raids from the 2nd Tactical Air Force.
We were going along and looked up. Oh, there's 5 planes up there. There must be ours. That's all right.
And we were cheering. But it seems silly really to be cheering because we were in just as much danger as what the Germans were. But they, I don't know, you do some crazy things, I suppose.
They opened up with machine guns and dropped bombs. They hit the engine, put that out of action, but as soon as it stopped, we were out of that bloody truck. How we got out, I don't know, but you did.
I think I killed 40 or 50 of our people. And the bodies were all in bits all over the place, cannon shells, you know.
With the fear of being killed, either by the Allies or the German guards, survival was now paramount. The cadets are nearing the end of their 2nd day. They have now covered 40 miles in bitter conditions. Spirits are beginning to break with the sheer exhaustion. But tonight they will be well fed and rested in preparation for the last 20 miles in their final day. The prisoners, now in the 3rd month of marching, traveling over 600 miles, were becoming broken men.
As the march went on, you were beginning to care less and less for the others, and you were beginning to care more and more for yourself. It really became a battle of survival. It was no longer the United Kingdom, the Empire, and the German. It was you, the individual.
Each man had to look after himself. You hadn't the energy and the strength.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
The Third Reich was literally collapsing around them. Horror, chaos, and devastation was everywhere. By the time the POWs reached their final unplanned destination, many of them had walked almost 1,000 miles. Now they were crowded again into overflowing camps or herded together in open fields. As they waited and hoped, there were signs that things were changing.
We were near this village of Evacuation. We heard the guns firing, and we stopped and listened.
We could hear the artillery fire of the Russians in the distance, but they didn't seem that close. But it's sufficient to frighten the Germans because they were really, really frightened.
And we heard the guns going farther over on one side. They said, they're getting closer, they're getting closer.
And we went to sleep in those straw pallahouses on the bell tents. And when we got up the next morning, the German guards had gone. There was no Germans anywhere.
The guards just disappeared. Leaned the rifles against the walls and hedges and went.
We didn't hear them leave, but they'd gone. So we started then foraging through the countryside, trying to find food.
And all of a sudden, we saw coming down the road was 2 trucks. We thought, oh, quick, they're coming back. So we all hid in this field. It wasn't the Germans. It was the advance guard. The 9th American Army.
In the distance, we saw a load of tanks, and we thought, oh dear. So, of course, we got off the road inside. Tanks came nearer, and then we noticed a star. They were American. And they were absolutely wonderful.
One of the Yanks come up and said, you boys all right? We said, we are now.
Oh, we were cheering and shouting, and they couldn't give us any food. The only thing they had was blooming chewing gum.
They came up to us like they were throwing us care rations, cigars, We hadn't had a smoke for months, you know. Took a drag of this cigar. Yeah.
I was getting overcome with relief, if you like, at the fact that there seemed almost a dream that we were loose, but it sort of hadn't sunk in.
I couldn't explain the exhilaration or the joy of being free after all that time. It's something that actually numbs you. We just stood there, we couldn't believe it, that there was going to be no more guards, no more pushing around.
As the camps are liberated, the scale of the Nazi devastation becomes apparent. The Allies soon arrive at the sites of mass genocide.
Well, we've been waiting 5 years for this, nearly 5 years for a day like this, and I never thought that we'd come to anything like this, did you?
No, I didn't think so. I've never felt so happy in all my life, have you? Well, I'm ready to burst any minute now.
Well, how are you feeling, Joe?
I'm feeling better now than I've done this last 5 years.
5 years. Where are we captured?
St. Valerie.
It's the most exciting day of our lives. We've waited a long time for this.
Well, I think we ought to give the folks back home 3 cheers. What do you say, fellas? Hip, hip. Hip, hip, hip. Hip, hip, hip. Right, send a message to them. Yes, well, cheerio, Harvey. Cheerio, everybody. I'll be back with you very soon now.
We were told one morning that we were to be flown back to England.
We were put in trucks again, ended up in an airfield.
They took all the sick people out first and sent them on to Brussels. Aircraft came down, Dakotas, and took them to Brussels, and they were transported back to England very, very quickly.
Eventually took off 2 Dakotas to Paris and 1 Dakota for England. I was told, whether it's true or not I don't know, that one of the Dakotas crashed on landing at Paris and they were all killed.
We eventually took off on the Saturday night, and it was dark then, of course, and we landed somewhere, and when they opened the doors I thought they had taken us back to Russia. It was snowing, but all along there it was all signposts, welcome back home, welcome back home. And apparently we had landed at a place called Beaconsfield in England, the first time, and there we were given hot chocolate, sweets, tea, hugged and all the rest of it.
I'm not lying when I tell you that, I mean, I didn't do it, but there were fellas jumping out of the plane and kissing the grass. You can understand it, can't you?
I was really surprised at the way the RAF at Cosford treated us in 45 when we got back. It was absolutely fantastic. And it was an Air Force worth belonging to.
The Long March itself had been such an extreme situation. They thought they were facing death. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. It created anxieties in them that actually remained with a good number of them post-war.
I'd never do it again, and we used to say we'd shoot ourselves rather than be taken prisoner again.
It's something you never forget. It leaves a mark on you. Makes you sentimental and an old twit. But it's something that has benefited you as well, because you've seen what other people can do.
We couldn't talk to people very easily, and I certainly wouldn't think for any time of getting married due to nightmares. The nightmares are still with me now.
Captured while fighting for their country, imprisoned and locked out of the war, only to be force-marched thousands of miles in appalling conditions, these men finally had their victory. They had held together and endured, marching out of the ruins of Nazi Germany. Their spirit must not be forgotten.
So ended captivity. There can be few who would willingly live through it again, but there must be many who still draw inspiration from the knowledge that much can be endured, and that, for those who have lost it, freedom has a value which is worth all the sacrifices made for it.
This is the most magnificent sight of a generation. They have come back from a terrible and bitter battle, but still in their tired and half-closed eyes is mirrored the spirit and cause for which they fight. That has not gone. That can never be taken away from them.